This is where the magic happens.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another YouTube video. Today, I'm joined by my good friend Levi. He is a fellow writer and reader, and we've been working on projects together. And today, we are here to do a review discussion about Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I recently read it for the first time. Levi's read it before and reread it, and then convinced me to read it. And so we're going to kind of run through it a little bit and talk about some things, and just have kind of a loose discussion, run through our thoughts. So, what's your history with it, Levi, as far as when you first read it,
Yeah.
and then, rereading it again?
I was probably 15, 16, teenager. It was before the movie came out, and it was just a really good science fiction book. I was reading a lot of them at the time, but this one stood out to me. Probably because I was pretty used to like reading a series, and it was fairly common, especially when it was about kids, for it to to have them in training or something, and that was basically the whole of the first book.
Yeah.
And then they would go on and defeat the ultimate enemy. And so I remember getting near the end of this book and thinking, man, I'm gonna have to go to the library and get the next one to see how he if he defeats the buggers and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So obviously spoilers if you've never read Ender's Game.
Yeah.
Like every book, you should read it before you hear the story.
Yeah. I think this will be a spoiler. Anything we talk in this will be a spoiler review.
Don't need that, right?
They can't see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, and anything, I think it's fair to say that anything we talk about in this will be a spoiler, just so we can actually get into the meat of the book. But
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, yeah, I having just read it, finished it yesterday or the day before. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good theme, young adult kind of science fiction book. Talks about a lot of things. I personally felt like it was more of an adult story than it was like for teens. And I just think because some of the themes are pretty heavy, and it's not like there's a ton of content that's like, super violent or graphic, or just unnecessary for kids to read. But I think some of the themes might just go over a kid's head.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's not that fun either. It's not like it's that like.
Well, it is a little bit, I think, because I remember reading it and right away I was interested in who are these people. Like it starts off with two people having a conversation about Ender, and you have no idea who they are. And then he has a monitor in his head and gets taken out, and so I think everything really draws you in, even as a kid. I was 15, so maybe it was a little bit different. But I think what really is a captivating idea here is Ender himself, because he keeps overcoming everything, right? There's no point in here where he loses.
Yeah.
And that on its face should mean that he's like some sort of Mary Sue and he's not a very good main character. But in reality, he's constantly winning and he doesn't want to do what he's doing. He knows how to win and he ends up doing it, but he wishes he wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so it makes him hate himself, and it isolates him more, and it leaves him more. And that leads into the theme of youth in this, right? Children are supposed to be able to make huge mistakes and blunders. If you've ever played chess with a kid, they're going to do all sorts of really dumb moves. And that's perfectly fine. That's what a kid's supposed to do. And adults are there to help them and to save them. If they're getting bullied, or if something bad's happening, or if they're afraid, or if they're crying, they immediately have the comfort of adults. And so when he's isolated from that, like all these kids in the battle school are, they're forced to give up childhood immediately at the age of 7 years old. There's that scene where they're crying in the bunks the first night, and Dad comes around and touches each of them, and they cry a little bit more. And then after that, they're forced to be adults. They're forced to grow up. And what that does to those kids is obviously a very big moral and ethical question. And so the leadership is saying it is worth ruining these kids' life if we can create one that can save all of humanity. And Graf says that directly to Ender, saying that he has to give it up. And so and that's a theme. Mazer gives it up, right? He gives up his entire family so that he can extend his own life.
Yeah.
The idea that you owe any semblance of a good life in order to save humanity or protect humanity, or like that's something you owe, is also a theme. And the way they all connect, I think, is really brilliant. So that's why I think it's a good book, and that's why I reread it.
I think it's a good book. Yeah, I'm not trying to say that. And I think it's really interesting what you just said there, where the idea that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few is kind of the goal, or kind of the point that these, like, the adults, the generals, Mazer, all these characters are trying to make. And I think that's something that the reader is we're supposed to grapple with that. But I think it's interesting because in the book, they kind of look at the buggers as this hive organism who has one story, one thought. They don't have a language. They've never written anything down because they don't need to. There's no reason to communicate because they all are coexisting and sharing the exact same thoughts and memories. But to a certain level, the needs of the many and the needs of the few, that philosophy is sort of the same as everybody having the exact same thought and having this telekinesis. And so you can maybe say they're no different really than the buggers. They just have a quicker understanding. And even the machine that they have, the Ansler, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm. Or Ansible.
Ansible. Yeah. That machine is made to mimic what the buggers do, which, expedites communication faster than the speed of light, instantaneously, which is what the buggers already do. And so, in a way, in them saying, okay, well, one person dying, 1,000 people dying, 1,000,000 people dying is good to save all of humanity. And the buggers would feel the same exact way. And so that's an interesting thought, where it's like there's not much of a difference.
Right. We became like the buggers.
Yeah.
And there's even a part where Ender's gaining control in the command school near the end of the book. And he's trusting the people under him, Petra being ally or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
And to the extent where they're all moving harmoniously. And so he's like, I think it says, we look like a bugger's fleet now, or something like that.
Yeah.
And showing that, we've become exactly like our enemy. Ender acting as the queen. But to contrast that, Mazer says that our advantage is that behind every single ship is an intelligence capable of making a good decision.
Yeah.
Capable of adapting to the situation on their own merit. So it is an interesting contrast there.
Yeah. And in that final battle, the final game battle, Ender does notice that his commanders, one of the commanders did something incorrectly, but another one came in and saved it. And it's not him saying, I went in and told them what to do, but they knew what to do. Mm-hmm. So there is that level of yes, I'm in charge of all these people, but they are the best that we have, and they are all making their own decisions, and most of them are good decisions. So there is that contrast, I think. Okay, so if we look at the book, we go from beginning to end. What are the things that really stood out to you as this is what made this book? And what are some things that you said, okay, this maybe wasn't quite as well done?
The things that make the book, you could almost imagine a different version of this book that has Ender being 16 or 17, and that would be even more aimed at young adults, teenagers. But I think that would weaken it a lot, because this theme of these kids really being adults at such a young age makes this idea of creating the perfect general, creating the perfect commander, right? By forcing these people to have a third, things like that. That makes a lot more sense if it's right away, And I think it would be a whole lot less striking if it was a teenager or something like that. Because, I think most people, especially in fiction, are willing to accept that, teenagers, if they're really raised well, if they're taught well, can be just as smart as adults, if not smarter. We've all heard of the kids who graduate at the age of 14, 15, whatever, that's no big deal. So I think that was a choice that he had. Even I don't know if you know this, but this was a short story.
Yeah.
And so even in the short story, that was where it started, with this really young kid.
Yeah.
Being made into this commander, going through command school or battle school or whatever they call it.
Yeah, that is. I've seen. I looked on after I finished it. I put it on Goodreads that I had read it just to make sure that it was real. And then I looked at a couple of reviews, and there are a couple 1-star reviews. People hate the book, and some of the critique is that he's so young. But I think that's one of the strengths, because we're reminded so often that he's so young, and part of that is to just prove his genius. That this kid is just beyond everything, and all the other kids as well. But I think, to your point, like, starting super young is what you do. You look at athletes, and some of these athletes who are really, really good, they would look back and they go, "Oh yeah, I started playing this sport when I was 2 or 3 years old." And before you could even, if it's basketball, you could barely hold a basketball when you're 3 years old, but that's when they were starting. And it's that thing where if you want to be the best, at a certain point, there's so many people that are trying to be the best. You just have to start earlier and earlier. And so, in a future where it's not like this is heralded as a good thing, where they have this limitation on how many kids you can have, and the government just taking your kids because they believe that they're superior, and all this stuff. It's not seen as a good thing, but it does make sense, I think, to kind of an extreme level.
Yeah, I agree. That and I just think it wouldn't stand out so much.
Yeah,
if they tried that.
If they were teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the reason why I feel like it's more of an adult book, because for a teenage book, we don't. If I was reading this as a teenager, I don't have as much relatability because the characters are 8 years old.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not like a middle grade book. I don't feel like, because it's kind of heavy in subject material, which, again, that doesn't say it's bad at all. I mean, teenagers have read it and liked it, and adults have read it and liked it. And so I think, you just write a good book, and then the audience will kind of find itself. But I think, that young age makes you kind of, as an adult, maybe reflect on it more. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really unique about it is how it handles future technology. Mm-hmm. It never makes anything super advanced. There's not robots walking around or AI that's as smart as humans, but there's a game that's being created by the computer.
Yeah.
And it's a lot like AI now, where we're not really sure. Like, in the story, they're not really sure why it's creating the things that it's creating in the game. And there's a lot of AI that's like that now, where it will create things and people aren't sure why it created it like that. And so that seems very, like, in one sense, I remember thinking it was very tamed, because a lot of science fiction would have, these super advanced AI, like in Halo or things like that. But it feels like a very natural progression from where we are, and even where computer games were in the 80s when this was written, that it would eventually become a thing that could create more content in itself. That might be something we see soon. And then also with how they look at the internet, and it's called the net in the book, but it's not just, I guess this is my point, the internet isn't just him saying this is what the internet will be in the future. It has a purpose in the book. His siblings are kids, and so the only way that they're going to gain influence in the world is if people don't know that they're kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that the internet would provide. And so,
and anonymity.
Yeah. And so that's a good use for this potentially future. I mean, at the time, nobody knew what the internet was going to look like. So he was only using it as a way of getting these two characters to have influence over the politics of Earth.
Yeah.
And so that's every technology in here, right? The computer is only as good as it is because they need this almost uncertainty about why these things are appearing in this game that Ender's playing, that's messing with this psychology. And then same with the Ansible, that comes from the buggers, but it works perfectly to allow for the final chapters of this book to happen as they do.
Yeah.
And so the technology that exists in this book isn't advanced for no reason, in the way that it is advanced. is to tell the story the way that it happens.
Yeah.
Allow it to happen the way it does.
Well, I think a cool thing as well, or a thing that's done really well in regards to the technology, is that it's not super explained. I could easily see this book being a couple hundred pages longer if he went out of his way to really explain the science of all these things, because he doesn't. That's not the point. The point isn't to really know how the game works. The point isn't really to know how space travel works and how they can get up there quick and how the gravity, can be turned on and off depending on what part of the space station you're on. He explains enough, and then the big story is just Ender and how he is viewed by the adults and the other kids, and how he's isolated and all that stuff that Levi mentioned earlier on. And so I'm a big fan of not over explaining. I do it in my own writing because I think as a writer, I want to know what the stuff is and how it works to make me better able to explain it to the reader. But I think a lot of times it doesn't. This is a good example of, like, if the reader doesn't need to know, don't put it in there. Don't clog up the story with unnecessary science or unnecessary things, because some of the science is impossible. The Ansible is, as far as where we are now, obviously, but it's just a tool. And if we can quickly say, here's what it does, you don't need to know more than that, because Ender wouldn't need to know more than that. He just needs to know that it works. That's all it is. And so I think that's done really well, to not clog things up with unnecessary explanations of things that ultimately, as long as we know that it's there and what it does, that's good. We don't need to know how it does what it does.
Yeah. And that part of that is because an intuitive reader is going to read an explanation, and they're going to think, okay, I must need to know that for later.
Right.
Like you can think of in Harry Potter books, whenever like the port key comes into play.
Yeah.
You need to know how that works for later.
Right.
Or in, I'm sure, multiple Anderson books. Whatever his name is. That's what I've been told. I've never read any of them. But the magic system is explained in the early half of the book. And then
the Brandon Sanderson books have a very common theme, it seems to me, where the magic is explained in a way that's very scientific. It has very set rules, and it's explained that way so that at the very end of the book, when the action actually starts to take place, he can break one of those rules, or he can do something that is beyond one of those rules, and then you go, oh, and you sort of understand what's going on, and doesn't come as a surprise. So yeah, it's. Those examples are very true, where it's like you do need to know why those things happen, so that when there's a reveal, when they use the port key or something, you go, okay, that actually, I understand what that is, and you're not just blindsided. But if those things don't take place and you don't need to know, they shouldn't be in there. So that's one thing he does really well.
Yeah, we should read Ready Player One next, so that we can talk about how poorly he does all that.
Oh, yeah, that one's. I mean, a lot of people like that book. I've
really?
Not read it. It's famous, at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be. I mean, I'd be up for it.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about throughout this is, they isolate him. Graff and Anderson will say that they need to isolate him. Adults can't intervene. He purposely makes Ender stand out as the bad guy on the first launch up there, so that none of the kids will want to be his friends, to see how he handles that situation. Yeah. But there's a lot of self-isolation too. Like, once Ender has the opportunity to switch that all around, he doesn't, there's this earlier on, he starts training with some of the other launchies, and in a way, they become friends, and they just do these practices, and that goes on for years. But then there's a moment when Shin and Ally, two of the other launchies that came up to battle school with him, are making jokes with each other, and Ender's right there, and it's a joke. It's like an inside joke about something that Ender was a part of. Yeah. And then they laugh, and then look at him, and they're, oh, sorry, I forgot you're right there. Yeah. And he realizes in that moment that nobody sees him as being somebody you can joke with or something like that. Right. And it's part of that recognition that everything he's doing to make himself the best, right? To win, essentially. And in doing that, he's isolating himself from everybody else. And they recognize that, and they treat him as such. And so then he continues doing that when he's commander. There's even a quote: "Let the boys learn that leniency comes from their toon leaders and harshness comes from their commander."
Yeah.
That's Ender. It will bind them together better in the small, tight knots of this fabric. So Ender is purposely leaving himself away from building any relationships with his teammates because he's the commander. So they need to feel like he's harsh towards them.
Mm-hmm.
And while his platoon is lenient towards them, his platoon leaders rather are lenient to the rest of the men. And so he creates this isolation from the rest of his team so that he can be a better commander, so that they can win.
The idea of the three different characters, Peter, Valentine, and Ender, as sort of the villain, the empath, and then kind of like the bridge between them as Ender. That was interesting. And using her, at the Graf and Anderson, using her to manipulate Ender to kind of, get him over this hump a couple different times in the story was interesting. And then her with the whole like Locke and Demosthenes, the blogging. I think that's how
you don't know how to pronounce.
How do you do it?
You don't know how to pronounce that, Dave? That's weird.
But those two like blogging characters, I thought that was all very interesting. And I saw a comment, a review that somebody wrote where they said, that's, you've got these kids who blog and then that changes the course of, the world. And that's just so dumb. And that's such a tone deaf response, I think, because in our world, that is the, communication, information does shape everything. And so you see, people who write articles, people who blog, people who write news articles. I remember they, back in the day, apparently this is before I was born, but the War of the Worlds came out and it was a radio broadcast. Orson Welles, he didn't read it for radio, but somebody else read it for radio. And at the time, people thought that it was because it was so well done, they thought it was actually happening and there were aliens coming down and crashing. And so that...
Yeah, they would tune in right at the point when it was like...
Yeah.
The news broadcasting in the book.
Right.
And so the person was just reading it in that voice.
Yes.
The dramatic.
Yeah, and so that made them think that this is, because the limited information that they had, they couldn't Google it, they couldn't check it out for themselves.
Right. There was something displaying, Orson Welles or H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, yeah.
H.G. Wells, War of the World audiobook.
Right.
On AFM.
Yeah. It was just this, you turn to the radio and then this sounds like an invasion. And so I think that stuff does have power. And so I think, these two characters recognizing the net, this is this powerful connectivity thing. We can interact with everybody instantaneously, which I think is maybe another parallel to the buggers and how they interact with everybody. And so, I think her character is really interesting and then the way that she matures, and especially at the very end when she meets with Ender and she's like, I kind of manipulated Peter into not having you go back to Earth because he would just make you a pawn, and this is freedom. And you don't have a choice again. I took away your choice, but it would have been a bad thing. And so, I think she's a really interesting character who has agency, and she makes her own decisions, and she interacts with Peter insofar as it would help humanity. But then ultimately, once things are kind of set and ordered, she goes and does her own thing. So she's well done. She's well written. Yeah, she's really good. Here it is.
Demosthenes.
Okay, I think I was close. I think I said Demosthenes. Demosthenes.
All right. Here's what I want to get to.
Okay.
The title of the book.
Yes.
Ender's Game. What do you think of it?
I think it's capturing. It's good. It's 2 words. The main character's name is in the title. That's always a big plus for me.
Really?
Yeah, because I think memorable, if it can be memorable, it's good. If it can be 1 word or 2 words, the shorter the better. The longer titles, I'm not a fan of. If you're looking at my books here.
I'm trying to see. There's
Christine is a good one. Stephen King. I don't know if that's in frame or not, but that's a good one.
And the main character is Rhythm here.
Rhythm is a good one. Yeah, the main character is Rhythm.
Is it really?
No.
Okay.
Although, actually, I don't know. I haven't read the book, so it could be.
Oh, here's the name of the Wind.
Name of the Wind is right there. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, I think it's a. I mean, the whole book is the game. It's the battle games that he plays that are sort of like, kind of arena style, like paintball wars. Those are a game. The overarching thing of him being in this game, the fairy tale land thing where he has to defeat the giant, and he figures out the giant thing, and then he gets to the castle and he has to figure out the castle thing.
So lots of games.
It's all games, yeah, basically.
All the way up until the end.
Yeah.
When he thinks it's just a simulation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good way of seeing the title. But there's something bigger in it. He's called Ender because he's a third child in the cooperating society.
Yeah.
I think is what it's called. And you're not allowed to compliance society.
Yes.
Right? And you're not allowed to have 3 children. You're allowed to have 2. But the government can give you permission to have a third child if your genetics would be beneficial to them. So a third child would, be really good in this case for the battle school. And Peter was, too much of a psychopath. Valentine was too empathetic. So they allowed these parents to have a third one because otherwise those 2 would have been geniuses. They would have been great for it if it wasn't for those, for that dichotomy.
Yeah.
And so Ender was the perfect balance. And so he's called Ender because he's ending. He's a third when he's not supposed to be there. They were supposed to end at Valentine. Yeah. It's kind of a loose idea there, but you can kind of see how that might be something kids would start calling them, especially young kids.
Yeah.
He's also called a third. But I think what's great about that is that I would bet money that Card wanted him to be called Ender before he came up with that idea, because the name Ender is the theme of like the problem solving in this book.
Yeah.
Which is that the enemy needs to be annihilated. The solution is to conclude your enemy, to finish them off.
Yes.
And so he is the Ender. He will end the Bugger Wars. He will end Stilson. He will end Bonzo. He will anybody who is ultimately a threat, anybody who's putting him in a position where it's either him or them, he ends it, right?
Yeah. And he doesn't just stop it. He recognizes it. And I think the first chapter, maybe you're getting to that, but the first chapter is just encapsulating the whole book, because he has this recognition where Stilson's on the ground, and he thinks, okay, I could walk away now. He's already beaten. But if I do that, then they'll come back again, and they'll come back again until they finish the job. And so if I finish it now, if I preemptively do it, if I think steps ahead, then I'm completely ending it. And I'm completely finishing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it keeps being what he has to do. And every time he does it, he has this point of reflection where he's like, I hate myself for this. So there's this one quote, I think I have it in my Kindle version, where he says to Valentine, he says, no, you don't understand. I destroy them. I grind them and grind them until they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I make sure that they can never hurt me again. That's not the exact quote because I don't have it pulled up here. But that's what he explains. And in that moment, he's saying it with a self-hatred.
Yeah.
So he's answering 2 questions. How is he the best at the battle school that there has ever been? And why does he hate himself? Why does he refuse to continue on to command fleet or command school, or whatever it's called? And that's the reason. So he hates the fact that even though at that moment he doesn't know that he killed Bonzo, he hates what he did to him. And so, in essence, Ender's game is to end people. So it's also the Ender game,
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think the title's pretty clever.
Yeah, I also think that it's nice how it
makes a little
wraps around the little planet right there. That's kind of nice.
If that's supposed to be the Bugger's world, that's what's going to happen. He's surrounding it.
Yeah, that's nice.
A little bit of a illustrated illusion.
Yeah.
One other thing.
Yes.
On the idea of Ender's game is that he is the perfect killer, right? Perfect commander, which means he's treated as a tool. And so throughout the book, people aren't making a decision for him. but they're putting him in a position where there's only one decision.
Yeah.
Right. And those positions. So like I talked earlier about how on the face value he's like a Mary Sue, but in every situation where that comes up, unlike when he's backed into a corner, or I guess exactly like that, because again he's forced to make a decision he doesn't want to make.
Yeah.
He's being controlled, right? So Graf tells him exactly what Ender needs to be told that'll make him go to battle school, even though he wouldn't really want to.
Yeah.
And then it's the same thing when Valentine comes to him and tries to convince him to go to Command Fleet on behalf of the IF. He ends up realizing that he's going to make a choice that he doesn't want to make because that's the only choice he can make now. And so it feels to him that he doesn't have any choice in his life. He's forced to be the killer that he is. He's forced to be the Peter, as he would put it, that he is. His older brother, the psychopath.
Yeah.
But the very end of the book, when he finds the end of the world, as was displayed in the video game, and he finds the egg, then and only then does he realize that he can be more than an ender, somebody who ends somebody. Yeah. He can actually undo what he did to the buggers. He can be the speaker for the people that he ended.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it has a nice wrap up to it. In kind of, it's a little sad because the last couple sentences, I think they just Valentine and Ender are just traveling around, and it seems sort of like this is it. This is all we can do. But there's a little bit of hope because he's hopeful that he can plant that seed, that egg, and fix kind of what he views as what he did wrong. I do think the parallel between him and Peter the whole time, where he views himself, everything that he does wrong, every time he hurts somebody, every time that he just brutally defeats one of the other commanders in the school, he just thinks he's Peter, and he's just that's all he can wrap his head around. And yeah, it is really like the Mary Sue-ness. If the book was about him, if the book was more about like the conflicts and the fighting, and that was the story, it was he needs to overcome this thing rather than overcome himself. I think that's really what the book is. It's this personal journey of him, doing what has to be done, and kind of overcoming his own self-hatred and self-loathing, and just recognizing that I'm the best. I have to do it. If I don't do it, it won't get done. And so I think if that's the theme, then he does follow the hero's journey of rising, recognizing his failures and the things that he's doing wrong, failing, wanting to quit, going back to Earth for 3 months, all those things. And so, if you look at it from that lens, it is a good story. He's not just a Mary Sue because he's overcoming himself ultimately. And yeah, because really there was a point towards the end of the book where I was like, he has not lost at once at all. He really has not lost. Does that make him, I had that thought, does this make him a Mary Sue? Is this a bad character? But it's not, because that's not what the point of the story is. The point of the story is not for him to just, rise and then fall in the actions. It's for him to rise and fall in himself. And so
you can almost see it as the question of, what if a kid was the best possible commander?
Yeah.
In which case, what would that kid have to deal with? Well, he would have to deal with other people telling him what his future was. He would have to deal with being isolated from everybody else. So it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the best commander.
Yeah.
And the real question, the real struggle is him versus the people trying to control him, and him, who he wants to be versus who he actually is.
Yeah.
And that's why in the book, people like Mick or Dink are telling him that, I guess Mick doesn't do it, but Dink is telling him that the teachers are the real enemy.
Yeah.
And so when the final fight he has in battle school, where there's two armies that he has to defeat, and he gets really mad at Anderson afterwards.
Yeah.
And then he goes on that rant about how the teachers are the real enemy. That's who they really have to defeat, and it's impossible to win. And the frustration goes through that. And that's why he stays for, 2 months, 3 months, Earth's side.
Yep.
It's a way of trying to win, trying to beat them. But he can't. He can't beat them because, well,
he's a part of them.
Yeah. He's a part of it. He's also human. So it would be like defeating himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also like that. Um, there's that side of the story, and it would be a great book if it was just that side. You can imagine this book, and it has like the Klingons as
Mm.
aliens. Still with the what I mean by that is like they're going to try to defeat Earth, so they're a threat. But the fact that Card takes it so that there's actually this question of like, well, all are the buggers going to do it?
Mm.
Because ultimately, we as humans, we don't need if we're thinking of an alien race that we've encountered that we fought with, we could have 99 signs that they want peace, but we just need one for it to be a good reason to go and annihilate them.
Yeah.
To do xenocide.
Yeah.
To commit xenocide, and really there's always that one reason, because really any alien race, unless they're very similar to us, we can't know for sure that they're serious about peace, that they're not trying to trick us or something like that,
Yeah.
And so I think it handles that very well. I think he recognizes that, and that's why he does make the buggers a species that did wish to end the war and no longer do it once they realized who humanity was, once they realized what they had done, and the differences between them. That's it adds another dimension to the book that I think once again functions to bring it back on Ender. The buggers were really good at defeating humans at first, but they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And the same with Ender. He killed Stilson, he killed Bonzo, and he killed the buggers. And each time he killed them, he didn't know that he killed them.
Right.
Especially Stilson and the buggers.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, that makes him exactly like the buggers. And so he can forgive them easily. He can look at what they did and say this was all just a misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's really well. Yeah, it's really well done. Yeah. Have you read any of the other Ender's Game books? Because there's like 6, I think, or 8 maybe.
Yeah, there's. I think there's more than that, because part of the stories and stuff. I think it's a quintet. Part of it is right after this is Speaker of the Dead, which I've heard is a very different book, but I haven't read it.
Okay.
And then the other book that people suggest to read after this is Ender's Shadow, which follows Bean's story.
Okay.
From after they defeat the buggers.
Okay.
So I think through battle school. So it goes along this story and then continues afterwards. And some people say that's more of a direct sequel to this.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I think in that book, Bean is described as being like the next option.
Yeah.
So if things had failed with Ender,
okay,
he was going to be who they relied on. And so what does another Ender do if he wasn't the Ender?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think Bean is an interesting character because he does. He comes into the school. Ender treats him as he was treated, but it seems like he does it sort of out of necessity. This is what needs to happen. But then he has this conflict within himself of: is this the only way to teach somebody in this environment? Am I just kind of putting back the things that were put on me as kind of like revenge for my past or whatever? So that's really interesting. That would be. I wonder how well those are received, like the sequels.
Yeah, I think people who are big fans of this really enjoy them.
Yeah,
but the reason I've never read them is that this to me works as its own book.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't need anything to follow it, and I think a lot of the questions it leaves up to the imagination are really good.
Yeah.
That's not to say that the rest of the books aren't good or worth reading. It's just that its ability to stand on its own is part of the reason that I would consider it a timeless piece of science fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does seem like it would last. I actually saw the movie first. I don't know what year that came out, but I saw it a couple years, I think, after it came out. And I was, I don't know, I thought it was okay. I don't think it was anything special. I remember like the big thing was that they're doing all these games in like these simulations, and then there's like the final one turns out to be a real battle, and they killed the enemy.
Yeah, that was the big twist.
Yeah, the big twist. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't think it works well for movies. It's funny, when I was reading it, I was trying to imagine it adapted. I saw like an anime because
Yeah.
there's so many points when they're in their head.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
most of the time it's Ender, but you go to Valentine's perspective every once in a while, or you go to Bean's.
Yeah.
And so if you want to accurately show what's going on, you have to be able to display their thoughts, and anime does that.
It does that well because you can take like 30 seconds of thinking and put it into like a 1 second, in the action.
Yeah.
And somebody has a flashback of memories. And that works. For some reason, it just works well in anime. Or we accept it, maybe.
I just imagine like an animated anime scene where the gate opens and Ender sees there's no stars and there's no enemy, and they supposedly have been there already for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's when they're fighting Salamander, I think.
Yeah.
And you can see his face. They must be around the gate.
Yeah.
They're waiting for us. And like he goes through, this is a bear. This is all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
All these emotions.
It would work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's what any book that would be better as a book or is already amazing as a book probably wouldn't make that great of a movie. Like the best books are formed so well to this art that it would have to change a lot to become to fit a different art form.
Right.
Like I just recently read Red Rising, and I could see that being a really good, I think, animated show, because otherwise it'd have to be a lot of CGI and things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of makeup to make them the colors or make them taller than everybody.
And it's another first person.
I think it's first person.
Yeah.
And so it'd be better as like an animated show where you can go into the head a little bit more, have a little bit more of that narration.
Yeah.
And honestly, I could see it being more captivating because there's so much in that book that's visual.
Mm-hmm.
And while the writing, I think, is really good, nothing against, what's his face?
Pierce
Brown. He's just a Brown. Wow. Brown wrote that story. Not a Gold.
Which a Gold would have written it. A Violet would have.
A Violet, yeah. But so like that book, and a lot of books, can be made into movies or can be made into shows, and that's a reasonable alternative art form for that story. Mm-hmm. But in the case of Ender's Game, the way that it has us in his mind and the way it tells a story, I think fits perfectly into a book.
Yeah.
There's another example of that I was thinking about recently, like another book I read that couldn't be anything other than a book. I can't remember it this time. Nothing comes to mind for you.
I think sometimes I think it's hard for the movie to do something well, like you said, and so I think of like the Dark Tower series, which they tried making the first. Well, I don't know. I guess not really the first one. They tried making a movie that kind of encapsulated some of the books. I haven't actually seen it, so I can't technically speak on it, but it did very poorly. Mm-hmm. And they obviously got some things wrong, but that one it's large. It's large scale. And again, I think anything science fiction can be tough because you're dealing with CGI. And so if it doesn't look good, especially in this day and age where we expect things to look a certain way, you can kind of suffer for that. I don't know. What do I have?
Yeah, Skeleton Crew by Stephen King. Is that better than the show?
This actually, there's a Skeleton Crew, the Star Wars show.
Yeah, is that not what this is?
That is what this is. Yeah, he wrote a Star Wars fan fiction that they turned into no, but there is a short story in this. It's his collection that will be turned into a movie, or it already is a movie. It's coming out.
What is it called?
The Monkey.
The Monkey.
Yeah.
Oh, so what
the guy on the cover. Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't Toy Story 3 already do that with like the monkey looking at the cameras?
Did they?
Yeah. They have the monkey with the
symbols
looking at the cameras, watching to make sure nobody escapes the daycare, and then the toys escape the daycare or something like that.
Really? I've seen Toy Story 3.
Yeah. Is that what this monkey does?
No, I think he kills people, but
you haven't read it.
I haven't read any of this yet. I should read it, but I don't know. I've got a lot of books that I need to read.
I've seen some of this going through. There's no monkey in it. It's already
all right. Yeah, they took some creative liberties.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else for Ender's Game?
If you're one of the people who didn't like it, or is hesitant, I think read it with the idea that these are kids who are being forced to not be kids. Like they're forced to not have a childhood.
Yeah.
And then allow that question of whether that's okay. If humanity is in the balance, is it okay to breed kids essentially to be good commanders and surrender their own life in the process? Because that's really on the character level who the characters are. That helps you understand them. If you're thinking kids aren't like this, you got the wrong mindset. These aren't normal kids.
Right.
There's billions of kids in this world who could never do any of the things that even the worst of the kids are doing. The Mick or the Bernard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so you have to have that mindset. It's only because I do think this will be. It already is a book that's taught in high schools. It's on the reading list for the Army, the U.S.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So whether you like it or not, it's a very good book. And the reason it's good is because of how well and how accurately it shows you those things. Like if you read it and you're like, oh, a commander can be friends with this platoon.
Yeah. I mean, I coached cross country, high school cross country for 6 years, and being friends with the runners, it's not as effective as being a coach, and I still in contact with some of the runners beyond coaching, and they're out of high school, they're in college or whatever, and I think that dynamic can change. But when you're trying to lead them, it is better to have that separation and to say, no, we're not friends. Maybe down the road we can be, but there's a better way to do this. And obviously, high school sports are a lot different than the military.
Yeah, or battle school.
Yeah, but I can see the parallels. So, yeah. So yeah, I think if you, depending on how you look at the book, if you go into it thinking this is kind of a hero's journey, the goal of the book is for him to rise up, and it's fun, and it's really not. It's kind of bleak throughout the book.
It's almost the opposite. It's already, like I said, we already know that he is capable.
Yeah,
like they monitored him. They saw everything they needed to see. They know that if he went to battle school under their training, he would become the best commander.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of if he can rise up and do that.
Right.
It's whether he should and how.
Yeah.
And ultimately the struggles that leaves him with.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So that's I guess our discussion review of Ender's Game. 0 edits, and if there were edits, they weren't edits.
No. Yeah.
Everything is live.
You might have noticed sometimes it would cut from like here to here. That's just us moving really fast.
Yeah.
I just did it. So I'm here. Now I'm here. That was less than a second.
Yeah. Unedited too.
Yeah. Unedited.
But yeah, that's Ender's Game. That's our thoughts. Levi, thanks for joining. Thanks for, I guess maybe we could add this on to extend our video a little bit. Are there anything that you pulled out of this that would help your own writing, and make you think about how you make your own novels and all that stuff?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that the first chapter is almost like almost spells out the rest of the book, because he's no longer being monitored, so there's no teachers watching him secretly through his own eyes. And so these bullies surround him, and they're going to pick up on him a little bit. And, for a 6-year-old being picked on by bullies, that's horrible, right? For adults reading it, you're like, you'll get beat up a little bit and you'll be fine. But to Ender, he's like, I got to end this. I got to make sure this doesn't happen again. And so he ends up killing that kid. And you don't know that at that point in the book.
Yeah.
But that tells you why he's picked. He saw only one way out in which he could end the bullying.
Right.
And that required really beating on Stilson and kicking him while he was down.
Yeah.
And so that little chapter at the beginning, which introduces you to a lot of other things, that scene, that interaction, is what leads to the rest of the book. And so it just read from this idea I have that the you almost want a short story to be the start of your book. An entire beginning to end of an incident or something that then tells the reader what the rest of the book is going to be like. So that's something I would take to the rest of it.
Yeah, that's good.
How about you?
Yeah, I like that idea. I think the brevity in not over explaining stuff. I just think, there's not a lot of, this is what the color of their suits look like. This is he just doesn't get into a lot of detail on all those little things because that's not what the story's about. And so to me, that is really important because while he might know those things, he might have notes and he might have, a novel's worth of notes that describe everything and explain everything so that it makes sense to him as the writer. He doesn't put that in the novel because he doesn't need to. And so that's something that I think is something that I want to try to put into my own writing, that I don't do too much and I keep things short so that we don't have just massive novels. So
nice.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. So thanks for watching. Thanks for following along. We will maybe have another review at some point. This was fun, I thought.
Yeah.
So good little discussion. Let us know in the comments if you read it, if you like it. If you don't like it, it's always good for a discussion down there. So anything else?
Yeah, I just thought I'd read a few quotes real quick.
Go for it.
From the book. Human beings are free except when humanity needs them. Individual human beings are all tools that the others use to help us all survive. Oh, there are times when the world is rearranging itself. And at times like that, the right words can change the world. That's Peter. When Ender Wiggins holds our fleet in his control, when he must make the decision that brings us victory over destruction, will there be military police to come save him if things get out of hand? That's Graf talking to one of his higher ups who's trying to stop Bonzo from killing Ender.
Yeah.
Ender Wiggins must believe that no matter what happens, no adult will ever step in to help him in any way. And I butchered that one. All right. There's no teacher but the enemy. No one but the enemy will tell you what the enemy is going to do. And the rules of the game are what you can do to him and what you can stop him from doing to you. I am your enemy from now on. From now on, I am your teacher. Okay, we can stop now.
All right. Thanks for watching.
I can eat this now.
Well, yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, great.
We'll see you in the next video.
It looks tasty.
Really?
Yeah. You don't think so?
No. Sweet. That was only 55 minutes.
Really?